Naiya's Wish, Part 1, Naiya, Chapter 1. I rose up through the darkness, reaching for the intriguing sound beckoning to me from above. Light began filtering through, bringing color with it and turning my blue-green world into a painting. Dabs of yellow, pink, and brown came into view as I neared the surface. Breaking through, I felt a cool tingle of air on my skin, my warm cocoon of water beading off me, and I clearly heard the song that brought me here. My eyes focused on a woman, much taller than I, not surprising since my kind of short stature. There was something square about her. She appeared to be as wide as she was tall, making her ungainly. She walked beside the pond, raising her voice in a melody both joyful and nostalgic at once. It intrigued me, and I swam closer, gentle as a ripple, not making a sound. She glowed with life. It shimmered golden around her, and I wanted to know her secret. It radiated off her, cocooning her in a glow so intense it took my breath away. Her physical awkwardness evaporated in the brilliance of that light. The woman followed a sandy path leading beyond my pond to a wooden building and the silent water wheel resting beside it. For a moment I allowed the still mechanism of the mill to take hold of my awareness. Ever since the pond was constructed, the creaking of that wheel had been my constant companion. Why wasn't it moving? The woman turned towards me, and I finally understood why she appeared so oddly proportioned, like two frogs' eggs hanging from either side of a leaf. Her hand rested on a perfect, round, protruding belly. A smile played on her lips, lighting up her dark eyes as she looked upon the proof of the life growing within her. She sang for that child, unborn, as yet unknown, and in that moment I was drawn into the magic of human life. A great longing welled up within me. I wished more than anything to experience something so miraculous. In spite of myself, I felt my own hand probing the flat, empty expanse of my abdomen. She was a vessel, filled with life, while I was nothing, barren, devoid of such essence. For all the magic that filled me, I lacked this one ability. I could not create life. Envy raised its serpentine head in my breast. I wanted more than anything to experience what that woman held between her cupped hands. Yearning took hold of me and I almost cursed my nature, the very reason I couldn't ever have a child of my own. The fabric of her gray dress lifted up from the protrusion of her pregnancy, the hem hovering around her shins, and the bodice and skirts emphasizing her state. Everything about her drove my need to feel that joy. I wished I could cry. The human ability to shed emotion might lighten the weight of my burden. No such luck. I was empty. I noticed a figure by the doorway to the wooden mill building. His hunched shoulders and hands wringing each other and brushing through his hair every so often spoke volumes, and my attention fell on the silent wheel. What happened to stop the sleepless engine of motion? A shadow flitted over me, and I saw the woman walking past, picking up speed as she went to join the man at the door. Being human, she didn't see me. Only the ones in tune with their magic could see one of my kind when we didn't want them to. I couldn't hear what she said over the distance. Not that I cared. In that moment of my longing, all that mattered was the woman and her blessing, the gift of her nature. Watching her go, another wave of desperation hit me. I floated near the surface of my home, utterly and unbearably alone. I had spent so long not caring about my neighbors, but something shifted inside me that day. I wanted to know more. When it was clear she wouldn't return to her stroll, I dived. Green murkiness surrounded me, cloaking me in its familiar coolness, but for once it didn't offer any comfort. That human home where life grew in a shimmering glow of magic beyond my reach, that place built on the banks of my pond, consumed my attention even as it disappeared from sight under the waters of my home. By the time I reached my glistening abode, water solidified into a semblance of walls and arched doorways, filled with my glittering collection of gifts from the humans above, and illuminated by the beams of refracted light. I had made my wish. I would have a child of my own, no matter the cost. I had to fill the void consuming me from within, and I had seen the spark of life in her eyes. I wanted that too. My heart told me a child brings joy and laughter, like I saw on the pregnant human's face. And I yearned for the day I could share in the miracle of life. My wish came true, but not at all how I imagined it would. I am Naiya. Some call me a water sprite, others a nymph. The humans of Kvarn say I am a nix, an evil creature of water and magic. To my own people, I am madness personified, shunned for what I am. This is where my story began, on a bright day at the turning of the seasons, when I followed a voice, a song, speaking to me through the layers of existence. Chapter 2. My longing grew, and I found myself floating to the surface of my pond every day. I hid myself among the patch of water lilies bobbing close to the mill. That patch was the most convenient place to observe the humans. The man was often by the doorway or just outside the building, pacing and wringing his hands. I rarely heard what he said to himself, but his anxiety was a cloak wrapped about him and threatening to suffocate him. He was an intriguing figure. His oval face adorned with a trimmed beard, dark with streaks of silver, contrasting with the disheveled state of his hair. I watched him draw his fingers through the strands time and time again. He wore tailored clothes, the dark blue washed out to a memory of its former glory, but I could still make out the fine weave of the wool composing his breeches and coat. I even saw some tattered strands fraying at the coat's sleeves. My existence was tied to the mill pond and the mill. By extension, I was connected to the miller who owned them. I was linked to the man because his creation was my home. He'd put time and effort into building the pond and tended it in his way. That man who wrung his hands by the doorway was the miller, and I learned that the woman who fascinated me was his wife. All my attention focused on these two. I felt connected to them in a way, wanted to know more about their lives and be a part of these neighbors whose home was so near to mine. They were intriguing because they were so different from everything I knew. The miller muttered to himself, and at times, when his pacing brought him near enough, I made out some of his words of worry. I could smell the fear coming off him. My limited knowledge of the circumstances surrounding his life, though, made it difficult to derive the true source of his woes. From the tattered state of the thatched roof and a broken slat in the mill wheel, coupled with the state of his formerly elegant dress, I imagined some of the trouble had to do with money, but I could not gauge any more than that. His wife, the pregnant beauty whose life-giving state sent shivers of wonder through my being and made the hollow within my chest contract with aches, was another enigma. Her heart-shaped face offered a study in contrasting emotions. Some unknown sadness lent weights to her being that simultaneously wanted to soar. I caught her staring out into the distance, her presence dragged down by sodden thoughts, reeking of death. There was a pain within her eyes, but I could not understand it. My natural buoyancy could not grasp what dulled her mind with pain. I struggled to fathom these humans. How could they both be so preoccupied, allowing a dark blanket of despondency to smother the light they engendered? Why did they take the beauty of life so lightly? My body was racked with pains from the discrepancy. I often found myself contemplating the child. What would become of it with such parents? A few days after my first encounter with the miller's pregnant wife, the woman stepped out of the mill swinging a shawl about her shoulders, leaving her single waist-long braid uncovered and shimmering iridescent in the sunlight. The pink tassels swung around her belly, the pale color highlighting her cinnamon skin. Another figure stepped out. This one appeared female, although I could not be certain, as the being was square of shoulder and barrel-chested. Then my eye fell on swollen feet visible below the companion's brown skirt. They walked up the wagon track beside the stream. The companion wore a pale yellow scarf about their head, covering any further signs of their gender. The desire to follow the object of my obsession overwhelmed me, and being an incarnation of the element that gave birth to me, I could travel at will within the currents of water. In the twinkling of an eye, I dissolved my physical being into the fundamental element and rippled into the core of my essence. Reducing myself to a single drop of water was as natural as breathing is to humans. Focusing my intent, I floated into the stream and sped along beside the miller's wife as she waddled on her way, the green fabric of her skirts rippling around her. With its laughing chatter, the brook carried me faster than she walked, but I knew where she was going. The only place along this track was the village, that hodgepodge of earth and bricks, wood and thatch, mixed with overpowering essence of animals and humans. Before the water took me to the far end of the settlement where the tanner's impurities spilled in, I suffused myself into the earth, using my magic to guide myself to the clear spark of aqua at the heart of the village. Once in the well, I allowed my being to flow out again and took my form of choice. I looked at my pale hands and sensed my body rippling into its physical form in the gentle tug of the water around me. My dark hair billowed around my face, and out of the corner of my eye, I watched the strands floating about me. I preferred taking on the softer features of a humanoid form, rather than the green-skinned, pointy-eared aesthetic favored by some other naiads. I turned my attention away from myself. I wasn't here to scrutinize my physical form. I had to find out more about what was going on at the mill. Dark stone rose above me, cutting out a circle of blue streaked with white. The walls of the well were damp and coated in algae, shimmering dark green. I strained my senses outward and listened with intensity. Delight filled me when I heard a group of women's voices drifting down from above. The washerwomen were gathered at the washing station beside the well, and the sounds of splashing and scrubbing accompanied their conversation, which revolved around the people passing by them. Most of their discussion dealt with human inanities, but I knew I could count on the gossipers to fill me in on what I wanted to know. Nevertheless, their chatter made it clear to me what strange creatures they are, worrying about what someone wore to their weekly religious ceremony, or who was having an altercation with a neighbor, rather than discussing how they could keep their village clean and their children healthy. At long last there was a shift, and one of the women raised her voice. "Hilda, it is so good to see you." I perked my ears. That was the name of the miller's wife. I made out a muffled reply, but the person was too far away to hear properly from the depths of the well. After a moment, the woman above me replied with a farewell, and I heard the scrubbing starting up again, with renewed vigor. "Poor thing," another chimed in, starting up the conversation again. "It must be hard on her being so far along and married to the wrong miller. Mr. Peter is such a catch. I wonder when he'll pick a wife." "Yes, Hilda must be so worried. I've heard the watermill is deserted these days, ever since Mr. Peter built the windmill." Well, the watermill is far, especially when you have sacks of grain to carry," another chimed in. "'Tis the misfortune of life." The conversation was interrupted by some loud beating, and I could not make it all out. "'Tis a blessing," the first washerwoman continued. "The windmill is a wonderful addition to Kvarn, and the time it is at hand when Nate and Hilda must adapt to the changing ways of life. The new engines are said to be sturdier and more reliable. At least that's what Mr. Peter says. I'm sure Hilda will get by. Nate's always been hard-working, and she's nothing if she isn't industrious." Another woman chimed in. "I do feel sorry for her, though. You remember the to-do when they were betrothed? Everyone's always said she's too good for him, and now that's been proven true. It's a reminder to all of us to stay within our station and never marry above it. Nate should never have sought her out. He shouldn't even have looked at her. But here they are. This and their previous hardships are their own fault for not keeping to the natural order of things." General agreement followed, and their gossip shifted to the next passerby. What ridiculous nonsense! Humans were filled with preposterous ideas about how the world worked. Humans are humans. Status has nothing to do with life's hardships. Everyone carries burdens, irrespective of their heritage, background, or even species. I lost interest in the woman's chatter, knowing I had enough information about the misfortunes of my miller. I did not need to stay any longer. Discorporating, I filtered back to the stream and fought my way against the current. I was grateful when I arrived at my still home at the pond. I was tired. Traveling as a water drop and using my magic so extensively drained me. I sank into my blue-green world, allowing the watery walls of my home to enclose me in their comforting embrace, and let oblivion take me. That night, the full moon's gentle song woke me, and I drifted to the surface, recharging in the silver light. Magic caressed my damp skin and absorbed into my drained being. It tingled silver sparkles under my skin, reinvigorating every fiber of my body. I basked in the slaking of this thirst and rejoiced in the energy tingling through me. As I drifted in the light of the moonbeam, I pondered the miller and his dilemma. If people weren't coming to visit this mill, what would happen to my pond? Was my very existence threatened if the mill fell into ruin?